Hi, I'm Ken Martin, the DFL Party Chair, and I want to thank you for tuning in today to our DFL weekly message, The Chair's Corner. I'm excited to welcome Senator Jeff Hayden this week to give his take on this week's news at the Capitol. Senator Hayden was elected to the state Senate in a special election last fall after serving in the House. Thanks so much for being here today, Jeff.
I appreciate it, Ken. Thank you.
Yesterday, the voter ID amendment legislation was heard in committee in the House, and it's on its way to the floor in the Senate. Can you give your take on what's going on and how important this is that we beat this amendment back?
Yeah, this is one of the most important amendments we have, Ken. We know that voter ID really disproportionately affects seniors, the handicapped, veterans, and people of color. We've seen these bills all across the nation, just most recently in Wisconsin, in which they've had an injunction to stop the voter ID process. This has disproportionately affected those that will be out of the state if they want to vote, those that may be in transition, those that are elderly, those that are in nursing homes. So we are fighting as hard as we can. Hopefully cooler heads prevail and we won't put this as a constitutional amendment.
Absolutely. I think when you look at this issue, the fact that there's 300,000 seniors without a driver's license, we know that college students, a vast majority of them don't have their current address on their license, low-income people who don't have state IDs or a driver's license, a whole host of people who would be disenfranchised by this constitutional amendment. And as the guy who ran the last recount in the state,
that's right. You know all about this.
Well, one thing that's very clear, we've had two major recounts in this state in the last two election cycles, highly litigated, millions of dollars spent on each side, and not one instance of voter fraud was found in either instance. And so I think, this is clearly a solution in search of the problem. What are some of the consequences, in your opinion, of this amendment being in the ballot?
Well, one of the things I think about it, we really want to think about is voter suppression. This goes all the way back in our nation's history and some of the most unflattering times in our nation's history, where there was a poll tax, where people had to kind of pay in order to vote. So people have to go out, find an ID. If people move frequently, if people lost their ID, then they're going to have to go out and buy another ID. And that is essentially a poll tax. It also sends a bad message to our children, and it sends a bad message to the elderly, saying that if you don't have a current ID on the actual day of voting, then you're not going to be able to vote. And I think about someone said in outstate Minnesota, one of the proposals is they want to have a provisional ballot. Well, in some parts of St. Louis County, you might be 4 hours away from Duluth, in the northwest corner of St. Louis County. So that means you have to vote, you have a provisional ballot, and then you have to make a special trip into the county seat whenever you can get there, and then show them again, go buy an ID, and then show them that you lived in a place that you might have lived 50 years or more. So I think it sends a really bad message. And the last thing is to our veterans, those that are serving overseas that want to vote. In committee, I asked the author the question, what would they do? How would a person have an absentee ballot? And they didn't know. They hadn't figured that out. So not only is this a solution looking for a problem, this is a bill that's not ready for prime time.
Oh, that's absolutely right. And I think when you look at the statistics, it's alarming how many people would be impacted here. What are you hearing actually from other legislators and people who testify at the Capitol on this important issue?
People are alarmed about this issue. People feel like that this idea that we're going to throw everything make everything a constitutional amendment really flies in the face of our process. Typically, constitutional amendments are really, really saved for really, really big issues that we really think that the electorate as a whole really needs to weigh in. But we have a representative government, and each and every year, a couple of years each, every 2 years, and in the Senate every 4 years, people get to look at our record, people get to see if we represented their issues, and I think that they vote that way. And so I think for us, this is really kind of bogging down the process. We should be talking about things of how do we create jobs in this state. We should be talking about, all of the other bigger issues. How do we provide health care? What do we do about the housing foreclosure crisis? All of those things what we should be talking about the legislature, but we're spending an awful lot of time on this issue that really there's no problem with.
Well, a lot of different divisive constitutional amendments. The fact is, as you mentioned, what the Republicans are trying to do is distract attention from the issues that affect Minnesotans. And, at the end of the day, people don't support these constitutional amendments. They want people to focus on jobs jobs. They want people to focus on the economy, our schools, and getting our state back on track. And so the only thing, as you mentioned, that these amendments do is try to divide our electorate and get them focused on things that don't matter. Now, this week you proposed an exchange up at the state legislature. What are your hopes for Minnesota with this institution?
Well, as you know, Ken, as part of the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, the President's health care plan, the kind of framework, really how it's going to work is through an exchange in which people go in, figure out kind of what's the type of insurance that they need, what's their family composition, and there's a mechanism that goes in and figures that out. And so we are mandated in which to do that by 2014, right? We should have a working exchange in addition or in anticipation of the President's health care plan. So with myself and Representative Aaron Murphy, who you had on last week, we introduced a bill, one of many proposals that says we want a health care exchange that's really patient-centered, that's really client and people-centered, that really makes sure that people have a place to go, people who don't have broadband access, because this is more than likely going to be a web-based product, that people can go, really sit down, have navigators, and get the health care that they need. It's important for all Minnesotans, but in particular, it's important for people of color. We have some of the greatest health care disparities in the country here in Minnesota, and a lot of that is access. A lot of that's the inability to find the health care, to figure out what door to go into. And so we really have an emphasis making sure that we have access. The other thing we have is really a governance structure that is people and patient centered. So we will have a lot of different people at the table, but we want to make sure that we don't have an abundance of our health, of our HMOs and of the providers. We want to have a nice balance because we want to make sure that it works for everybody. And we want to make sure, and I know our HMOs have been getting beat up. This isn't beating them up, but what it really says is we want to make sure that we have the best product and that they don't come under any scrutiny of being too close to the process in which they have to implement. So we have a lot of emphasis in the governance structure on people, on patients. We have a lot of emphasis on people of color, and we really think it is a great progressive exchange plan.
Well, these are the types of bills that we should be talking about in the legislature.
Yes.
I thank you and Representative Murphy for actually having the courage to put this forward and have a discussion on the issues that actually impact people's lives in the state. That's what we should be having a debate on up at the legislature. Outside of the exchange, do you have any specific goals or bills that you'd like to see passed within the next 2 months of the legislative session?
Well, you know, I think what we're working on is a strong bonding bill. We got to put Minnesotans back to work, and I think having a strong bonding bill, as you know, the governor has proposed $750 million bonding bill that will help projects all across the state. It'll help flood mitigation in the Red River Valley in southern Minnesota. It helps expand our convention centers all over the state so that we can bring in more people. It creates a transit operating corridor right in the heart of Minneapolis where all of our new light rail trains will meet, and we'll be able to not only bring people into the metro area to work, but we'll take people leaving the metro or leaving the core cities out into the suburbs where all the light manufacturing jobs are. I even have a personal favorite. We have a pool in South Minneapolis that we want to refurbish. It will be the only free pool in Minneapolis as a whole, and we have a high incidence of drowning with kids of color, and we're surrounded by rivers and lakes, and we want them to swim, we want them to have a good time, and we also know that it's very important for young people between 3 and 6 o'clock to have a structured activity, and that keeps them out of trouble, and we think that that's going to be a great project.
Well, Senator, you've been a great friend of the DFL and a good friend personally.
Thank
I want
you,
to
sir.
thank you so much for being
appreciate it.
here. Keep up the great work up at the Senate, and Godspeed to you in this campaign coming up, and keep up all the great work. We really appreciate having you here today.
I appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
And thank you again for joining us on our weekly message. I hope you'll tune in again next week as we welcome another DFL legislator who is representing the values of our great state. Have a great weekend.